steadily it rises.
Hey, it's ODB, the Lincoln Addict, back with another video. Thank you for the continued support. I usually don't wear my Packers apparel on my videos, but I did want to do a salute to service here because we have Veterans Day coming up next week in November 2025. So salute to all of the veterans out there. We appreciate what you do. So I was taking a break today and I saw that Chip Foose and team debuted their 56 Continental. This was a car that he's been talking about in social media, on the official Foose Instagram, as well as YouTube, right? All of those main platforms. And although I did not go out to SEMA this year, I did want to briefly talk about this car. I don't usually talk much other than the 60s Lincolns from 61 to 69. That's primarily what I really enjoy. Although I will tell you, the 56 and 57 Mark IIs, I think they're awesome vehicles. I think they're just, people often say one of the most beautiful cars, if not the most beautiful car ever built. So this one obviously isn't going to be the for the faint of heart. You can see on the screen here, this is just a basic Google search, Chip Foose 56 Lincoln, and this pulled up. And what you're going to end up hitting is various different sites that kind of report out on the big breaking news. And this one doesn't really show much other than he did partner up, from what I saw in social media, with Blueprint Engines, and we can see that here. That's going to be a big key thing to this. Not sure. I'm guessing this was the rendering that he came up with, and maybe someone added a little bit to it, but it does look legit from what we can see here. Now, also searching, I landed on this 5657 Continental Mark II Facebook group. It's a public group. It looks like there's about 4,200 members in here. You can faintly see that in the upper left corner. And Kevin says, Chip Foose built a 56 Mark II from our parts car, which is freaking awesome. Now, when someone makes a post like this, let's say it's me, Lincoln Addict, oftentimes people are going to chime in, they've destroyed a car, this is the most beautiful car ever built, I can't believe this, so on and so forth. I've seen these cars at different auctions, and I will tell you, it's awesome to see one of these in person. I don't mind a custom 5657. Some people, I know it's not going to be their cup of tea. This one is very dramatic because it looks like a convertible, but it's actually a roadster. Him and his team chopped the top on this one, so cut off the roof, if you will. We know that Lincoln didn't build any from the factory. There's a storied deep dive that I'm not going to do here, where there's basically, my understanding is there's two and two different builders, and those still, I believe, both exist, but there's been countless, I would say, customs, if you will, over the course of time. How many roadsters, I don't know off the top of my head, but I do know there's kind of, the two main cars that most of the 56 and 57 Continental purists, really go-to folks, they could break all that down for you. I'm just here to kind of showcase this car. To me, Chip Foose specializes in taking something that's been built, tucking bumpers, doing some modifications, and bringing it up to, the Chip Foose design that so many people love. I'd love to hear what you think of this car, so please comment below. Someone in social media made mention that Chip seems to paint all of his cars the same color. I don't know how you could say that because there's been so many builds over the course of time. I think maybe they were trying to say certain colors, but I like this color. It looks very, very classy. You've got obviously a custom wheel as well. And what sets it off for me is the fact that there's no top on it. Again, seeing this car in person, I would think, hey, this is a convertible, but knowing the car, you would think, well, maybe it just has a hard top that they put on it, but I do not believe that has been produced or built for this vehicle. I'm not going to go through all of the changes on these. I'm certainly not a full-blown expert on the 56 and 57 Continental. Don't call this a Lincoln Continental. Others can chime in and explain that Continental was a separate division, and there's all of that, history, if you will. And I think my one opinion of, if you look at the amount of cars that Lincoln had in the 50s, it became very confusing. And especially like with 56 or 50, 58, 59, 60. There's so many different variations and things like that. And to me, I often think of like what Steve Jobs wanted for the iPhone. He wanted like one model, right? For the most part. And of course, that's expanded because they've realized like, hey, people like Shaquille O'Neal that have huge hands, he may want a larger phone. And, so now they have a streamlined down to a few models. And I think that's something that was a little bit confusing in the 50s for Lincoln. And then, of course, in 61 through 69, we saw a lot of advertising that kind of reinforced like, hey, there's two models, right? From 61 to 65, it was basically sedan or convertible. So again, just some of my nonsense in terms of what I've read and kind of seen over the course of time in terms of the 50s. But these cars continued, I think, to sell pretty well. I've seen some prices over the boards. I don't follow them super closely, but I know as time shifts and as there's cultural changes, maybe not everyone in a certain demographic is going to be fans of a particular car. And I've personally seen that with, like, for instance, I'm not a huge fan of a lot of the 80s cars. I don't know how many people are. I mean, sure, you've got a Camaro, you've got a couple of cool things, mixed in there potentially, but you have to really find someone that loves, an 80s Lincoln maybe as much as a 60s Lincoln or a 50s Lincoln. So, over the course of time, you're going to end up having more customized vehicles like this. Now, my understanding from looking at this is an LS engine, and that's what I've read throughout the internet. I know that's going to definitely, it has already set some people off because when this was shared in a couple of different places that I've seen, there were people chiming in, certainly might have been on the main Chip Foose Instagram, and they certainly were expressing their feeling of, the travesty, and it's, that's the most horrible thing that's ever been done to mankind and whatnot. And I just look at it and say, hey, whatever floats your boat, if the average person didn't know, if I didn't say it was LS swap, they probably are going to look and go, oh, the valve covers look like they're Lincoln. That's a, Lincoln Ford Motor Company engine, and, be on their way. But that's what they do. You can see here, they still have the remnants of the overhaul in studio there, my understanding, which this is a recent photo. And of course, that's where the hit TV show was filmed there at Foose Designs. The cool thing about this is with the full-blown resto mod, I mean, they're taking it down to the shell. You can see the Dynamat that's been placed in there, and it really just looks like a high-end hot rod at this point, which is super cool. If you think back to the old song Hot Rod Lincoln, who probably in the 50s didn't want to be able to go buy a Lincoln. If you think about how much money it cost, I mean, it was a lot of money. This, I believe, from what I've read, was the most expensive or one of the most expensive cars in the world. I think it was certainly in the US, if not, maybe not in the world, but it was regarded, and it's often described as one of the most expensive cars at that time. And, for instance, if you would have told someone back in the day, hey, we're going to give you a Mark II 56, 57, and we're going to customize it and quote, make it a hot rod Lincoln, I'm sure most wouldn't, turn that down, if that makes sense. Now, there's one article, and I'll leave a link in the description. This was pretty cool. And obviously these different journalists, they're going to, their job is to write an article that's going to get people to their website, right? Whether it's shared on social media or me just using the good old search engine. And this was by Christopher Bruce, and it was posted about a little less than an hour ago. It's titled "Ford Purists Won't Be Happy with Chip Foose's Beautiful SEMA Build." And it goes on to say Chip Foose was one of the most notable personalities to emerge from their renewed interest in classic hot rods during the 90s and 2000s. He was responsible for some of the early notable updated muscle cars that he would classify as resto mods today. His company, Chip Foose Designs, latest creation is the 56 Continental resto mod on display at SEMA 2025. It's a gorgeous combination of classic and modern touches. However, the engine under the hood might turn off some purists, and obviously that is going to, raise some eyebrows potentially. Now, you got to remember too, if we look back at this rendering, I believe the clients were Pat and Linda. And you have to remember too, builders are often asked to build something, they want the Chip Foose touch, but they're going to work back with their clients, and they're going to say, hey, we could do this, we could do this. If we put this Ford engine in there, this is what's going to happen. If we do this, this we can work back with blueprint. Maybe we can get you something for the SEMA placement and things like that. So certainly don't bash the builder. And I would say don't bash the owner either. Remember, this is their vehicle. They could do what they want. This could have easily, it sounds like, became a parts car. It may have actually started based upon what we saw here from the individual Kevin. You know, he mentioned that Chip built this and his team from a parts car. But it goes on to say, most notably, the 56 Continental was never available from the factory as a convertible. Foose fixes that by chopping off the roof of this one off. He also refines the design by adding curves to the hood and eliminating the Lincoln ornament on the nose, which I did pick up on. The interior retains the look of the authentic 56 Continental, and ironically, my buddy Tony and I are big fans of what we call the biscuit interior, and this biscuit kind of pattern was also carried into the 60s, which is super cool. Whenever I see that pattern, I always think of also the 60s, which was a cool pull through for Lincoln. It's an LS swapped Continental. So far, there's nothing that Ford enthusiasts should hate, but the problem is under the hood. Foose's Lincoln packs a blueprint engine, LS compatible, 376 cubic inch, 6.2 liter V8 Pro Series engine, which is related to General Motors' famous LS family of the 8-cylinder power plants, 530 horsepower. So this thing definitely moves. What I'd like for you to do is kind of comment away. Like, do you like this car? Do you like the fact that someone took a car that's more than a half century old and refined it, you know, to current conditions? You know, in closing, I often would expect people to chime in and go, I just don't like it. You know, they should have restored it and things like that. But if you keep in mind that restoring one of these cars back to the factory is also not cheap. And oftentimes, if that's the response, you know, folks will come back and say, well, then they just shouldn't have done it. They should have waited for someone else. Well, guess what? There may not be another person that comes along that says, hey, I'm willing to put X amount of money into this vehicle to bring it back to 100% factory specs. And what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to go to one of my favorite websites, bringatrailer.com, and I'm going to type in Mark II. And the reason why I want to do that is I want to get a quick preview on what these vehicles have sold for stock. Now, I recall off the top of my head seeing some of these that sold for like a lower price than I would think. The market continues to change over the course of time, especially as, you know, older folks maybe pass on and they, you know, their families take the car, and maybe there's not as much of a response for a Mark II as there was 10, 15, 20 years ago. So I've seen kind of a shifting a little bit there with those models, as we have with the 60s Lincolns over the past 20 years, 25 years or so. I've continued to see the prices go up. And that's in part, I believe, I had this conversation with someone recently, due to the fact of like the Entourage TV show, you know, in that early or late 90s into the 2000s, with that 65 black Continental convertible being featured in that opening sequence, the intro, if you will, that brought a lot of awareness towards those cars. Like, what is that? You know, that's pretty cool, man. Wow, that's awesome. So we have continued to see in the past 10 years a crazy elevation in the prices of the 60s Lincolns. And it kind of goes back to the styling. What do people prefer now? And you're going to have folks like Chip Foose and others. There are a few others that I can think of. One that recently changed hands, that was a gold one, which I think is owned by a guy that's in the truck club of mine. So, our truck club that I'm in, which I've been in for a very, very long time. But I want to show you this really quick, and then we'll close it out. Okay, so bring a trailer. I typed in Mark II. There's obviously different Mark II. So then I selected the Lincoln, which is Lincoln Continental Mark II auction results. So we're in October. Well, we're in November 2025 now. So this kind of beat down car, if you will, oddly enough, sold for $6,666 just less than a month ago. But like, for instance, let's go back here to this 28,000. Okay, let's look at this 28,000 that sold just about less than 3 months ago, a little over 2 months ago, I think is a better way to put it. And it does say it got away. So it did sell. When I look at this car, I'm not going to do a full breakdown, but like, if you look at this car from the front three quarters, you go, wow, like this thing looks nice. I'm a huge fan of blue. It's a beautiful looking car. I'm a fan of those wheels. I'm a fan of the styling of these cars. you look at some of these photos and you go, wow, that's a beautiful car. I guarantee if we looked back in history, these cars were going for a lot more money. Like if 20 years ago, if you were to tell someone, hey, I'll sell you a 56 Mark II for 28 grand. Now, granted, we didn't do a deep dive in this one, but I think we can all attest from what we see here, it looks like a nice car. And the reason why I say that is there's market shifts. And I think over the course of time, like we've continued to see a little shifting away from this car. There's a certain demographic that loves it. There's a certain demographic that wants this car. There's a gentleman I spoke to via text a couple times the last year or so, and I believe he has a Mark II, and he wanted to get, he's probably around my age, within maybe 5 years, and he wanted to get a 60s convertible. He bought a 60s convertible, and he was looking to basically sell his Mark II. And, he asked me my brief opinion, and I told him, hey, I'm not an expert with those cars. But if you look at that price right there, you go, wow, if I've got a Mark II, I mean, certainly the condition's going to play a role, the color. There's a lot of factors in it, don't get me wrong, but I think we've seen a shift a little bit away from the 50s in terms of someone really wanted to collect it and drive it and things like that versus what we've seen with the 60s. Will that change eventually? Probably. There's going to be different trends. The 70s stuff is probably going to come around even more so than maybe it already is with some of the enthusiasts. There's always going to be a certain niche that really enjoys a certain model car, and you're always going to have those hardcore diehards. But to see the explosion, if you will, that we've seen with the 60s Lincolns over the course of time, I give a lot of credit to Mob Steel, Chris Dunn at Lincoln Land, John Cashman, Blair and Teresa, people that have been around these cars a long time, for them, they probably go, yeah, we've seen a little bit of up and down, but these cars have always been in our, our purview, so to speak. But for us, as people that, are fans of them, I think we could all agree that we've seen a giant leap over the course of time with the 60s of people wanting them, the sale prices, the resto mod prices. So with that being said, let me know what you think. Tip at the cap to Chip, Foose, and team, and to the owners of that beautiful 56. Hey, it's your car. Do what makes you happy. I'm never going to beat someone down for customizing a car. Hey, it's their money. It's their life. Let them do what they so choose. ODB, stay on the rise. Be safe out there. And don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. We out of here. Peace.
LA where the players play, and we ride on the things like every day.